Everyone is obsessed with Big Boy grinding up the Wasatch, but nobody talks about the wildest locomotive that ever ran American rails. The Milwaukee Road Hiawatha. Named after a poem about a Native American who could outrun his own arrow. And that was not marketing garbage, because these machines were capable of hitting 100 miles per hour in regular service between Chicago and Minneapolis. And they did push into triple digits often enough that it stopped being a publicity stunt and became part of how they ran the line. Trains from the 1930s running faster than highway traffic today. Your grandfather drank coffee in these coaches while cornfields blurred past at speeds that would have gotten any other steam locomotive arrested. May 15, 1935. Milwaukee Road hooks up a dynamometer car behind locomotive number 2, scientific equipment measuring every pound of force, and they run between Milwaukee and New Lisbon, Wisconsin, 14 miles of straight track. The engineer opens the throttle and that 442 Atlantic with 84-inch drivers just keeps building speed. Past 90, past 100, past 110. Later, writers claimed that the run hit 112.5 miles per hour based on a dynamometer trace no longer found in any archive. That number turns up again and again in the literature, but the original dynamometer documentation is not available in any public archive, so it lives in the widely repeated category rather than something we can recheck on paper. Class A number 2 appears to have reached the 110 and above bracket with a dynamometer car on the drawbar according to surviving secondary accounts, which places it among the highest claimed steam speeds on record, with no surviving documentation to verify it instrumentally. But that was just the warm-up. When the Milwaukee Road built the bigger F7 class Hudsons in 1937 and 1938, those 464s with auto-cular streamlining, the speed records went completely insane. Baron Gérard Vuillet, a French railway expert, timed a run from the cab between Chicago and Milwaukee and recorded a peak of about 125 miles per hour on his stopwatch. Wild if true, but still just a manual timing, not an instrumented measurement. In January 1941, a reporter from Trains magazine was aboard when the engineer hit 110 miles per hour twice during the same run, in the middle of a snowstorm with visibility near zero. These were regular scheduled services with paying passengers, not test runs. The Milwaukee Road timetable required covering 78.3 miles between Portage and Sparta, Wisconsin in 58 minutes, an 81 mile per hour average including station stops. One of the fastest scheduled steam services anyone ever put on a timetable, with averages in the low 80s that very few other railroads could even approach. Now here's where it gets mental. Running that fast means everything on the locomotive is operating at the absolute ragged edge of what cast steel and brass can handle. Side rods connecting those massive driving wheels are hammering through hundreds of cycles every minute, about 400 cycles per minute at 100 miles per hour, and closer to 500 cycles per minute near 120 miles per hour. The metal heats and expands, joints wear with every stroke, and the whole system lives or dies on constant lubrication to keep the steel from eating itself alive. The Milwaukee Road fitted these locomotives with Nathan force-feed lubricators, mechanical pumps pushing oil to every bearing and sliding surface. Oil was constantly distributed to cylinders, valve guides, crossheads, everything that moved. Miss one connection in that system, and you are about to have a very bad day. July 27, 1950. F7, locomotive number 102, was hauling the Northwoods Hiawatha eastbound from Milwaukee toward Chicago when the failure hit, the engineer running fast on the approach. About 73 miles out of Milwaukee, near Edgebrook Station on the approach to Chicago, the train was doing somewhere between 90 and 100 miles per hour when the right main crosshead just stopped moving. The crosshead connects the piston rod to the side rods, and it runs in a guide that is supposed to be flooded with oil. A connection link between the valve gear and the Nathan mechanical lubricator had failed. Nobody knew it, and both crossheads had been running dry long enough for heat and friction to build to failure. Later investigation confirmed overheating, but not the exact distance. What happens next is pure violence. The crosshead locked up solid, but the driving wheels were still turning at full speed, so the side rods just ripped themselves apart. The broken rod tore through brake piping and the train line, dumping the air and forcing an automatic stop. But at close to 100 miles per hour, it still needed 10,560 feet of track, almost exactly 2 miles, before the wrecked locomotive finally came to a standstill. Debris scattered along the right-of-way, with the main rod, the farthest piece, recovered roughly 1,400 feet from Edgebrook. Boiler sheets were torn, the running gear destroyed, metal thrown like shrapnel across the ballast as the train bled speed down to a stop. When they finally stopped, there was debris everywhere. 2 non-employees were struck by flying debris, one seriously injured and one with minor wounds. Everyone on the train itself walked away. The right side of the locomotive looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it for an hour straight. The boiler was sheeted and scarred, the running gear was wrecked beyond recovery, and whether the frame cracked or not, the railroad judged the damage too deep to justify repair. Milwaukee Road brought inspectors, looked at the wreckage, and made the call right there. Unrepairable. Locomotive number 102 was 12 years old, basically brand new by steam standards, and they retired her the next month. After that run, she never worked again. The official story is simple. Repairing her was not worth the money, and she was off the roster by the early 1950s. Later accounts suggest she was stored at Bensenville and may have been used as a source of components before scrapping in the early 50s, but surviving documentation is thin. No one lost their lives, which is the only reason this accident is not more famous. But think about what almost happened. 100 miles per hour, passenger coaches full of people, the locomotive self-destructing in a shower of steel. If one of those rods had actually managed to punch through the boiler shell, you are potentially looking at a superheated steam release at speed. That is a worst-case mechanical scenario, not something the investigation says almost happened that day. Put the same failure on a curve or a bridge instead of straight, flat track, and the likely body count climbs fast. The crew kept it together, the brakes worked, and the luck held just barely. This is what operating the Hiawatha actually meant. You are running a machine designed to live at speeds most steam locomotives never got near, doing high-speed trips day in, day out, with timetables that pushed crews to keep the throttle high for long stretches whenever the road and conditions allowed it. Every bearing, every rod, every valve operated at the edge where a single-point failure could cascade into total destruction. The engineers and firemen knew it, and they climbed into those cabs anyway because the Milwaukee Road needed to compete with Burlington Diesel Zephyrs and Chicago and Northwestern 400s, and the only way to compete was pure speed. 6 F7 locomotives in total. All 6 were withdrawn and scrapped in the early 1950s. None were preserved. They hauled some of the fastest scheduled steam trains anyone ever ran, so notable they were honored on a U.S. Postal Service stamp in 1999. But by the time diesel power took over and the maintenance math stopped working, the railroad saw more value in scrap and spare parts than in saving one for a museum. Class A. Atlantics had the same story in broad strokes. 4 were built, and all were gone by the early 1950s. Number 3 was officially cannibalized for parts to keep the others running, and in the end, every one of them went to scrap. These were not locomotives the company chose to preserve. They were tools, run hard for a relatively short career, and then stripped or cut up when the numbers no longer added up. That is the reality nobody talks about when they romanticize the Streamliner era. Otto Kuhler made them beautiful with Art Deco styling and beaver-tail observation cars, and riding the Hiawatha must have been incredible, watching Wisconsin farmland streak past at record speeds. But the people operating these machines were gambling with physics every single day. One dry bearing, one cracked frame, one failed component, and you are looking at number 102 all over again. Except maybe this time the train does not stay on the rails. So when people ask how deadly operating the Hiawatha actually was, the answer is not in the body count. It is in the fact that they ran these locomotives this hard for this long without killing anyone. That is not because the operation was safe. That is because the crews were that good and the maintenance was that obsessive. And even then, they lost one to catastrophic failure at speed. Milwaukee Road proved you could run steam at 100 miles per hour or more on a daily schedule, but the cost was burning through locomotives like consumables, and when one finally let go at 90 miles per hour, only luck and skill kept it from being a massacre. That is how deadly it actually was.